You're listening to Inklings of Insight. Today, the conversation is really going to center on relationships and social connections. And I want to talk about really three different areas. I want to talk about society as a whole and generally the challenges that we're facing as a society to connect and build positive relationships. Then I want to talk on a more personal level and talk about the challenges that we face building, relationships with those that are one-on-one relationships. Think about romantic relationships in particular. And then I want to talk lastly about some of the things that we can think about and help us build more positive relationships in the context of the challenges that we're facing in those other two areas on a personal level and on a broader social level. And so, first of all, let's talk about the things that I think are really challenging us as a society to be closer together and to build positive relationships. On a high, 50,000 foot view as a society, what are the biggest challenges that we're facing? And I think there are about four. I think that the first one, probably the least impactful of them. Let's start with that. The least impactful one is probably geographic distance. Anybody who's been in a long distance relationship knows how difficult it can be to be close to someone when you're physically far apart. The third one, which intuitively might not seem like it's a challenge because it's in part helped us with that fourth one of geographic distance, is technology. We've come a long way in terms of social media and being able to connect with each other when we're not in the same place. But at the same time, according to the Pew Research Center, 43% of adults felt that technology had made it harder to form meaningful connections with others. And then the Journal of Social and Clinical Psychology found that social media use was associated with increased feelings of social isolation and loneliness, particularly among young adults. So even though technology has a ton of pros when it comes to helping us feel closer together, there are also some cons. It's not all, roses and butterflies. When it comes to the technological advancements that we've made, people are really struggling because of the advancements that we've made in technology. The second one, which actually could be exacerbated by technology, is social anxiety. According to the Journal of Anxiety Disorders, social anxiety affects approximately 12.1% of the population worldwide, and it impairs people's social functioning and their quality of life. I'm not an expert on, psychology or social anxiety, so I'm not going to speak too much on that. But suffice it to say, based off of the research, that is the second most impactful thing that's affecting our ability to connect as a society. And the first one is, according to the American Psychological Association, lack of time. 27% of respondents have cited that a lack of time is a significant barrier to developing social connections. So we've got lack of time, social anxiety, technology, and geographic distance, all things that are making it very difficult for us to connect and make positive relationships as a society. Now I want to delve into some of the issues that we're facing when it comes to personal relationships, getting closer to one another on a personal level. A lot of the people that are listening are married or in a relationship. Well, we know divorce is a significant issue in America and probably the world globally, but there are about 5 issues that are mainly contributing to divorce rates and separations of marriages and families being broken up, which has tremendous negative consequences on our society. So the least impactful, again, I'll go from least impactful to the most impactful issues affecting divorce. And the least impactful one is substance abuse at about 9%. That 9%, I want you to keep in mind, is not necessarily saying that substance abuse was the only reason for couples getting divorced, but there's some overlappage here. So there can be multiple reasons why people are getting divorced. But 9% of divorce cases are saying that a contributing factor was substance abuse. The fourth most impactful one was infidelity at 21%. So people stepping out on their marriages and adultery is accounting for 21% of divorces. 3, financial issues. So 22% of divorce cases cited financial issues as being one of the contributing factors for their divorce. Number 2, incompatibility. 43% of divorces cited incompatibility as being one of the main reasons why they were getting divorced. And then finally, the most impactful reason for divorce in America is communication problems. 65% of divorced couples said that one of the reasons was communication problems. And you'll see the sources for this listed as well. But I want to delve into each of these issues, but before I want to do that, I want to highlight the fact that just because it's the most prevalent issue in terms of people getting divorced does not mean that it is the most challenging issue. So what I want to do is show you a re-ranking of the list based off of difficulty to resolve this issue. And at the top of the list is incompatibility. And I'll go through the rationale for why this list is ranked the way it is. Incompatibility would be the first one, the most difficult thing to resolve in your relationships. And mind you, I'm going to talk a little bit later about how you might be able to work through these issues, or even preempt them before you get to a stage such as marriage. Second one would be communication problems. Third would be substance abuse. Fourth, financial issues. And 5, infidelity. Now I want to talk to why the first 3 are indeed the first 3, because the first 3 are the ones that I'm going to spend the most time addressing in terms of solutions and how we can go about dealing with these to better bridge our relationships. Incompatibility. So let's talk about incompatibility and why this is the most difficult issue for couples to deal with in their partnership. Well, the reason why incompatibility is so difficult is because fundamentally the differences, values, and beliefs and the personality of an individual is kind of who you are. Like, it's very hard to change who you are in terms of your values, beliefs, and personalities. And if those things don't match up, the friction and the ability to unravel the issue of incompatibility is very difficult to overcome, even if both people really want to do it and they're really committed to it. Communication is very similar in the sense that your communication style is something that's very deeply ingrained. It's very learned behavior. So it can take a lot of work to unlearn the habits that you've developed in terms of communication. Substance abuse is rather obvious why that can be a really difficult one, right? You can be psychologically or biologically addicted to something. And oftentimes it can take a significant amount of investment in rehabilitation in order for you to get beyond that. Financial issues and infidelity. Some of you guys might be looking at this and you're like, look, if he ever steps out on me or she ever steps out on me, like, that's it. Like, there's no resolving it. But from a practical perspective, infidelity and financial issues are something that you can develop symptoms of changing that can yield results much more quickly than something like incompatibility and communication problems. So let's delve into those top 3 most challenging things to address in your relationships and get a better understanding of them, and then maybe come up with some mechanisms for addressing them. So in order to really understand substance abuse, I want to look at 5 different areas so we can understand why do people turn to substances and drugs to begin with. So environmental factors is 3% of the reason why people turn to drugs and other substances. By environmental factors, what do I mean? I mean poverty, lack of education, exposure to violence, increase the risk of drug use and addiction. And this is according to the National Institute on Drug Abuse. The fourth one, which is about 7%, of the reason, if we were to think about this like in weighted causes for substance abuse, self-medication would make up 7% of the problem, according to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, which is where most of my statistical citations are going to come from. Some people use drugs as a way to self-medicate in order to manage what they might be dealing with physically, mentally, chronic pain, anxiety, or depression. Some people are just self-medicating. Curiosity and experimentation is the third reason. That's about 20% of the problem. Some people just try drugs because they're just interested. Simple as that. This is according to the National Institute of Drug Abuse as well. And then peer pressure or social influences is the second reason. Let's say that's about 28% of the problem, according to the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And then finally, coping with stress or trauma, 42% of the problem. So nearly half the problem is coming from stress or trauma. Now, this is really interesting because when we talk about stress or trauma, what we're really talking about is things like emotional pain, neglect, abuse. What do all these things have in common? They're relationship oriented. So people are turning to substances to deal with problems in their relationships. And then the substances are turning around and causing issues in their relationships. So it all comes back to this idea of really having to take care of your relationships and put in the work to focus on some of those other areas that we talked about, incompatibility and communication, and taking care of those things, because you can end up solving them with the wrong solution and making the problem that much more worse and creating an even more unhealthy relationship. So when we talk about those contributing factors to divorce, substance abuse was number 3. Number 2 was communication. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about communication and what is one of the more challenging things when we're looking to have healthy communication with individuals. Well, let's start with, again, the least contributing factor when we talk about communication: emotional distance. Let's say it makes up about 5% of the problem, according to the Paris Foundation, where they list the top 10 reasons for relationships failing and how to avoid them. Emotional distance involves feeling disconnected from your partner, whether that's physically, emotionally. It can cause all kinds of issues in terms of intimacy, trust, understanding. It makes communication difficult when it feels like you're not emotionally close to the person that you're talking with. So this can be important when you think about having conversations with people. First of all, you want to establish an emotional connection with them. You want to make them feel like you're in the same place with them emotionally. You're in the same space with them. You are connected with them. Listening can be really helpful in this regard, because if you're not listening to people and they don't feel like they're heard, they don't feel like you're emotionally connected to them. Contempt is the number 4 reason, contributing about let's call it 13% to communication problems, is contempt, according to the Gottman Institution. And what do we mean by contempt? Contempt involves expressing disrespect, disgust, disdain, verbally or non-verbally, towards your partner. So this is communicating through what? Sarcasm, insults, eye rolling, or other negative behavior that really is corrosive when it comes to the foundation of a relationship. It creates hostility in the relationship, which can make it very difficult for you to get through and create that emotional connection that you want to allow in order for you to have your message come through and communicate effectively. So quite simply, one of the ways to get past that is to avoid doing these things, avoid insults, avoid sarcasm, avoid eye rolling, avoid anything that's going to give the impression of condescension or aggressiveness. The third one, which is about 28, contributing to what? 28% of the communication problem, according to, again, the Gottman Institute, is stonewalling. So what is stonewalling? Withdrawing from communication, shutting down emotionally, behaving in a way that is perceived as dismissive. And sometimes, in all fairness, people do this in order to avoid conflict. But it's important for you to understand how your behavior can be perceived. Withdrawing can often be perceived as dismissive, which is something that I can personally attest to feeling like what you're trying to do is de-escalate the situation, but sometimes the person that you're communicating with can perceive that as you just not caring or being dismissive of the situation altogether. The second most impactful or most disruptive element of communication is defensiveness, contributing to what? 54% of the problem, right? So again, keep in mind that these percentages aren't going to add up to 100 because they are overlapping, so to speak. So defensiveness involves reacting to your partner's feedback by denying responsibility or making excuses rather than acknowledging your own role in the problem. If you're defensive, it's going to make it very difficult, rather, for you to be able to receive what's being said to you. And as a result, blocks off the communication, shuts down any opportunities to understand and furthermore compromise. Because this is ultimately where things lead, right? You need to be able to understand one another so that you can ultimately negotiate with each other. Everything's, when it comes to a relationship, from my view, negotiation. You need to be able to understand how to meet the other person halfway. How can you meet them halfway if you don't know what they want? How can you meet them halfway if you don't understand what matters to them or where they're trying to get? And the first most impactful issue, the most corrosive element of communication is criticism. And criticism can sometimes be constructive, but sometimes it can involve attacking or blaming the other person, their personality, their character, talking down on who they are instead of addressing a specific behavior or issue. And I get it. It's easier talking about this outside looking in, and when you're in the actual, heat of the moment, emotions are flared, it's a lot easier for you to be critical in a non-productive way. But it's important that when you're having engagements with other individuals that you focus on the issue, you address the specific behavior, but you do it in a way that is harder to perceive as an attack, that doesn't come off as you blaming them or having issue with who they are fundamentally as a person, right? Which can be very difficult. If both of you are incompatible, which leads me to the number one issue that relationships face, which is incompatibility. So I want to talk about some things that you might be able to do in order to deal with incompatibility either getting ahead of it if you're dating someone and you're thinking about taking it to the next level or advancing a relationship. You can think about how your values align with one another. Or if you're already in a relationship with someone and you're already in a committed relationship and you just want to better understand their values and understand where there might be friction points, and just kind of have a framework for talking through that. So you can take an extensive list of values. It doesn't really matter that the list is, really long or really short, or how comprehensive it is, but I would recommend a list of 50 values, 50, 60 values, and I would divide those values into 6 categories. This is just an exercise that you can do, and I'm gonna outline it to you. You can list out those 50, 60 values or more. If you want to do more, you're really having fun with this, go for it. Listing out those values and then rating them on a scale of 1 to 4. We rate them on a scale of 1 to 4, and the important thing here is for you to make sure that you limit yourself. Let's say you have a maximum of 15 of any given rating level across the entire list. So you're not going to rate more than 15 values at a 4. You're not going to rate more than 15 values at a 3. You're not going to rate more than 15 values at a 2. This will keep you from ending up with all 4s or all 3s, and it'll make you make the tough decisions about what values matter most to you. And after you do that, you'll be able to create a chart. And you'll be able to create a chart for yourself and for your significant other. It'll be this radial chart that will show you which values pop more in each of the categories. Let me rephrase that. It'll be able to show you which categories are more significant to you in terms of your values. Now, hopefully what ends up happening is your charts overlap very nicely, right? That means that your values are very similar and you are very compatible. But, it doesn't mean that if your charts don't overlap very well, that you're doomed to fail, right? There's still hope for people that have very different charts. And there is an argument, I guess, to say that maybe you guys are a better couple if your charts are very different, right? But the fact remains that you guys value very different things, and you're going to have to appreciate that about one another and learn how to navigate that, knowing that those differences are there. And sometimes, the most helpful thing that you can do is just recognizing what the differences are to begin with. So I hope you find this helpful, and best of luck. And I'm not even going to say luck, right? I wish you the best success in developing your relationships, your bonds, and your connections with those that are near, far physically, with those that are close and dear to you emotionally, and with those that you might have just met. So take care, and best wishes, best success. Thank you for listening to Inklings of Insight.